Welcome back to Stu Studio, Conservative Takes on Music. Jack White has been in the news a little bit lately all over the internet for a couple things that he said in some interviews lately. Now, Jack did just release a book called The White Stripes Complete Lyrics 1997 to 2007, so he's been on the interview circuit. And self-promotion for a book doesn't really seem like something Jack White would normally do, but he also seems to care quite a bit about this project. It's a collection of lyrics from the White Stripes, from unused songs from other bands that he's had like the Rack On tours, and even unpublished poetry that he's written. But the first interview moment that went a little bit viral was when Jack spoke out against Fender Stratocasters and Les Pauls. Jack said, "In my late teens, I decidedly hated anything to do with Stratocasters, Les Pauls, any of the common instruments that you see everybody use. I just thought it's so overused and so indicative of white boy blues if you had a Stratocaster, or your heavy metal if you use this kind of guitar." Now, this is a wild statement from such an influential musician, speaking out against the most commonly used guitar ever. But my favorite response was in this tweet saying, "My brother in Christ, you are white boy blues." And Jack doesn't shy away from being a blues musician or blues influenced, but I just thought that so perfectly encapsulated that. And it seems like he was being a bit too contrarian when he did pick his guitar. Said, "In the 90s in general, if I had a Silvertone guitar, to me in Detroit, I never saw anybody use that guitar. Never saw anybody on TV, definitely nobody playing shows or anybody that I knew owned one. So when I was using it, it felt very unique." And I think that's pretty indicative of Jack White just seeing himself as a little bit special. And he seems to be admitting that out loud. But what's gone most viral lately is Jack speaking out about Taylor Swift and how she pretty much writes strictly autobiographical music. Now, the quote that's getting the most attention is kind of buried in the middle of the interview, so we'll get to it. So this is Jack speaking with Dorian Lynskey of The Guardian. They're talking about why is Jack writing a book, and he says, really, he's selling lots of other people's books, he's publishing their books, so why hasn't he done it yet? Jack says, "I wanted to test the waters about doing a full book of my poetry and writings. I was a little bit worried about that being taken the wrong way. It's tough when you say the word poetry out loud. People can immediately think there's a pretension to it." And then the rest of the interview, Jack just proves how pretentious he actually is. Dorian asks Jack if he thinks that his lyrics are overlooked in his songs. And he replies with, "For every singer, the lyrics are overlooked in my opinion. A lot of people would never be considered poets just because they put words to melody. That's kind of unfair. No, I don't think like half of the rock songwriters out there would consider themselves poets. Artists, absolutely, but not poets." In talking about how he started writing poetry, Jack says, "As a teenager, I started going to coffee houses in Hamtramck, a city in Detroit, the real European-style coffee houses, not the modern-day ones. That seems a little pretentious to me, just separating Starbucks from the little local place. It's a bit irritating now to see 15 people on laptops, nobody speaking to each other. I almost want to open up a coffee house where it's not allowed and you have to talk to other people. I don't think that's a terrible idea. I think that would be kind of fun. I was writing, performing folk music sometimes, learning about art from all kinds of artists. It was a pivotal moment for me. The coffee house needs to come back and be a sacred place where people can commune and don't exploit it for social media content either." I think he's kind of just holding a special nostalgic place for the 90s and the coffee shops in a world before the internet and devices. Now, I think this next part shows just how shallow Jack is. When asked about his influences back then, he says, "Musically, it was all blues musicians, Charlie Patton, Sunhouse, Howlin' Wolf. That's fine. That's great. Flat out poetry, it was William Blake and Shakespeare's sonnets. There were times when Shakespeare would make me cry and I didn't know why. I just couldn't believe how beautifully it was constructed. It's almost like a human being didn't write this. It's like Isaac Newton. Accidentally, somebody had an IQ of 290 and changed everything." Now, we all had a moment in our teens where we thought that Shakespeare was just the most beautiful thing that we'd ever read. Like, art could not get better than that. But Jack White is admitting as an adult that he never actually ventured past the poets and the playwrights that you learn about in your early teens, and that he actually cried reading the poems that you read in middle school. Now, this response alone makes the rest of the interview kind of seem stupid. It's like saying your favorite movie is Citizen Kane or your favorite band is the Beatles. Like, yeah, that's great, it started it all, but the world kept going, and you didn't try to keep up with any of it. Then Dorian asks, "So do you make any distinction between lyrics and poetry?" And Jack says, "It's all poetry to me. I think all music is the blues, and I think all lyrics are poetry. When I hear a song, it bugs me when I can't hear what they're saying." Now, I think this response is especially out of place because if you listen to Jack White's music lately, you can't hear the lyrics through his singing. It's supposed to sound punk and raw, and it does, but to say that it bugs you when you can't understand the words and then release music like that is just self-defeating. And they talk about dream journals and dreams a little bit, which is something that shallow people do to make themselves seem deep. So going back to the pretentious point. Now, this is the response that went viral. Jack is asked if any of his songs are entirely autobiographical, and he says, "Not too much. Now it's become very popular in the Taylor Swift way of pop singers writing all about their publicly aired breakups. which I don't find interesting at all. I think it's a little bit boring for me to write about myself. Even if I've had a really interesting day, I feel like I've already lived that. I don't need to go through it every time I sing this song. If it's something really painful, I'm not going to put this important, painful thing that I went through out there for some idiot on the internet to stomp all over. So I put a percentage of that into what I do and then morph it into somebody else's character. I can't really learn about myself until I put it into somebody else's shoes. So it's not like he's crapping all over Taylor Swift. He's just saying he doesn't explicitly write about his life, like in his own words. He would rather put it through a lens of somebody else telling the story, which definitely makes it more interesting. It does seem pretty counter to modern rock and pop and punk music to just straight up say, I don't want to sing about myself or my own life, but I can definitely see where he's coming from, and I can see it put into practice in his songs. At least most of them. Because Jack White's latest release is called No Name from 2024, and on it is a song called That's How I'm Feeling. And if that doesn't sound explicit enough, here are the lyrics. When it's cold outside, I need the strength to stay alive, and when I'm in my home, I need the strength to be alone. That's how I'm feeling. That's how I'm feeling right now. So that seems pretty explicitly about a day that he had and a mood that he was in. On that same album, he has another song called Missionary. The lyrics to that are, I'm backseat driving when you're driving me crazy, but I can't drive a stick. I'm getting used to hearing my name. It's no longer making me feel sick. It's like a California vibration. It must be sweeping the nation. It's like a new sensation. So again, that's just him saying his explicit feelings from his own perspective. One line he says, no cap, practical perspective. I'm skeptical of anything, which I just thought that it was ridiculous that Jack White wrote a song saying no cap. Like, this guy's 50 using Gen Z slang. Says, I'm on a mission, baby. I'm like a missionary. Put me in that position and I'll make you miss me again. Will you ever miss me again? Just saying he's got something important to do, but if he has sex with you, then you'll love him again. Not very poetic from a guy who just published a whole book of poetry and lyrics. Now, I'm not against saying your own feelings in your own song. I do it all the time. It's kind of inherent in punk and pop punk, but I never said that I try to avoid it. Jack White specifically said that he thinks it's boring to write about himself, and then he wrote about his own feelings. What I thought was the more interesting part of the interview is this. Dorian asks, you recently posted a ferocious broadside against President Trump on Instagram, and it wasn't your first. Why do you never write explicitly political songs? Jack says, well, Bob Dylan, said the answer was blowing in the wind. He didn't tell you what the answer was. I think a lot of people in the protest days were torn. You want to make a statement, but the speaker can be chewed up and spat out. The search for hypocrisy becomes intense once somebody takes the podium and condemns somebody else. But when it comes to the president, I know a lot about it, so I feel comfortable saying it. But if I were to put it in artistic form, I don't think I would say those things directly. I wouldn't say the names, I would make up a character. And that does seem like the way that Jack White would write a political song, but it kind of speaks counter to the entire punk movement, writing explicitly political songs against the administration du jour, and really embedding their message in their music. It does seem pretty stupid not to use your platform as a millionaire songwriter, when you could write an absolute banger if you know what you're talking about like you say that you do, instead of posting petty statements on your Instagram. Now, I think Jack White has been on his way out of stardom for a while now. Like, I want him to stay in the industry. I love what he's doing with Third Man and vinyl pressing, but I don't give a shit what he thinks about politics or his statements on Instagram. I think I would actually find him much more influential if he was writing political songs. And we know that he has the ability. He just must not care that much. At least we know he doesn't care enough to inform himself. But let me know what you think. Thank you for watching this week's episode of Stu Studio. And remember, Jesus loves you.